So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Big Hero 6. So let's start the series. It was Naruto and Anko Mitarashi's first day. They had to meet new people, visit new locations, and reach into new pockets. And perhaps some fresh faces to greet. The flight from Japan to San Francisco was as comfortable and simple as Naruto had envisioned. First class had its advantages, and he wasn't just referring to the flight attendants. He was fortunate enough to receive more than 3 different types of soft beverages and severely salted peanuts. He was genuinely enjoying life to the fullest. Testing out his new language, Naruto murmured to himself, "Hello, dot." It sounded good to him, but he wasn't sure if he had sufficiently loosened his accent for others to understand. "How are you? My name is Mitarashi Naruto," he said. Despite the fact that his mother spoke English far more well than he did, Naruto was able to pick up a few words from her own sparse instruction and listening to conversations. As the two of them left the terminal, he could feel his mother grinning warmly at him. She knew he was trying, and that was all she asked of him. She should have started his English lessons earlier, back when they were in Japan, because she knew it was possible and would have made things easier for them both if she had found him a teacher. "Good, Naruto," Anko said, stroking her son's hair. "Now, we will be talking mostly English from now on to help you learn, okay?" she said. She couldn't help but giggle at her son's persistent complaining because, despite being only somewhat taller than him, she was treating him the same way she had when he was just hip-high. "Okay," he replied to her, "when it is just you, and myself." He didn't know what the right words were since he didn't understand English. Despite the difficulty of using the language correctly, he didn't let simple words stop him from enjoying himself in the new place. Naruto grabbed for the passport nearest him and started to examine it while Anko, wearing her famous brown trench coat, reached inside the coat and took out 2 passports from a secret pocket. Along with his complete name, place of origin, and the stamping locations, the passport contained his personal information. When his mother nodded back to him to confirm his views, he glanced at her curiously. His feet slowed as she hurried, letting her take the initiative and meet one of the officers examining the passports. The muscular security guard asked, "How are you today, ma'am?" while using one hand to take her passport and the other to take Naruto's. Her accent vanished without a trace as she exclaimed, "Just fantastic, the papers were right, Japan is lovely this time of year." She grinned and laughed at the guard, who couldn't help but join in. Her gaze lingered on Naruto, who gave the guard his passport in silence while he was preoccupied. He glanced at Naruto's passport and returned each one to its rightful owner, saying, "Maybe I'll save up enough and take a trip there myself. The wife would love it." His hand lifted to hold the brim of his imaginary hat, tipping it to them and grinning. "Welcome back to America, folks." Anko had arranged for one of her personal contacts to pick her and her kid up from the airport, and soon after, they were on their way after retrieving their bags from the return. Anko had her contact pick them up in a limo, and the two sat across from one another. It was loaded with San Francisco-style food and beverages as asked. San Francisco was the first and only attempt by Japan to expand beyond their main territory, having disliked technological growth and expansion before, though the Japanese were not the first to have arrived in the area. The early Americans did not deny them the opportunity of new land. In time, San Francisco became the meeting point of Eastern and Western cultures. It wasn't until 1906 that Japan stepped in fully to help the settlement after a massive earthquake that San Francisco became the metropolis that it is today. The book, which was written in both Japanese and English and contained a brief history of the creation of the very unusual city, was closed as Anko turned to face her son. Naruto gave her a languid nod and said, "Thank you for the instruction." He then took a sip from the soda can in his hand and put it back in the cup holder. "However, I would like to learn more about where we currently reside," he said. He reflected on his life before the abrupt move to America, which had always been just him and his mother. He knew that his father had passed away a long time ago, but he didn't know anything about him. His mother told him that he was just another target, a Jason-born type. Although he was the best in his own organization, Anko didn't care about him at all. His body had long since adapted to handling almost any and all poisons, and he had been trained in a variety of areas to be useful in all situations and scenarios. He was formidable in all of them: stealth, espionage, hot weapons, cold weapons, hand-to-hand combat, and more. Naruto was the child of a night of passion, a surprise to the killer who didn't have the heart to kill her child. Naruto was an all-around ninja. However, Naruto stood out from the others even more because of something. In an attempt to avoid drawing her son's attention, Anko tossed a crumpled piece of paper at him with all the power she could generate, deciding that this was a good moment to surprise him. Naruto felt the air being pushed around and heard the paper piercing it. He prevented the paper from touching him by raising his palm in front of his face. Subtle finger movements caused the wadded-up piece of paper to spin and float in front of Naruto's hand before being pushed to his other hand for capture. He examined the front of the paper after unfolding it, which revealed that it was some kind of brochure. The smile Anko had in her voice as she spoke, "You're going back to school, Sochi," only widened when she looked more closely at Naruto's happy tune change. San Francisco School of Technology. Naruto worked wonders with engineering and experimented with different sciences, but he never acknowledged it. He always wondered if he could figure out how to make his strange abilities more powerful or understand how they actually worked, but his true passion was thermodynamics and engineering. "You didn't?" he asked incredulously. When she heard Naruto laugh uneasily, she smirked and said, "I know how many hours you've spent in that workshop you call a garage, Sochi. All of those cars and other motorized things you have in there are more than enough proof to me that you want to do more than spend your days racing." "Racing? That is against the law," the young man said, laughing and grabbing his drink again before taking another sip. He gave her an innocent smile, but he knew that she wasn't buying it and that it was just a show and joke. "I like working on my cars and other projects, but racing is illegal and deadly, and I do not need the money either. We have more than enough, mother," he said. Naruto took a moment to read the pamphlet she had given him when Anko laughed at her son and picked up the history of San Francisco again, continuing to read to herself. The limousine reached Anko and Naruto's new home in less than 30 minutes. Anko and Naruto now owned the entire area that had once been an apartment building. As a form of compensation for forcing them from their homes, the previous occupants of every flat had been moved to other apartments in the city without incurring any relocation costs. Anko refused to allow anyone to handle her belongings except herself and Naruto. She had trophies from the men and women she had killed in her lifetime, as well as family photos of herself and Naruto as he matured into the fine young man he was now. All of the boxes containing their belongings had already been shipped to the new home. All that was left was for them to unpack and decorate it as they saw fit. After exiting the limousine and carrying their bags, the two of them entered the premises and noticed the several boxes scattered over the main floor. Anko told him, "Beds should be up. You don't have to stay in the room they're in, but just sleep there for now." She headed up the stairs after dropping one of her bags on the floor. They had the entire apartment complex to themselves, and Naruto was familiar with the general layout of the house thanks to the plans his mother had shown him months prior. Any room in the complex might be his. He stretched and sighed. Jet lag and spending the most of the flight awake had left Naruto exhausted, even if it was only noon. To prepare for a new day, the two left for the rooms with the beds in them. Naruto groaned as he awoke to the sensation of the morning light on his face. Naturally, the room he slept in had to face the rising sun, and naturally, the dawn had to strike him square in the face. His arms served as shields in the empty room, and he moaned in frustration as he tossed and turned to avoid the sun. His small blanket was insufficient to cover his eyes from the sun. Soon after, Anko rushed into the room, clad just in her trench coat, a basic bra, and matching underwear. After opening every room in the building for this particular purpose, she shouted into the room, "Morning Sochi. Any fun plans for this morning?" Her voice reverberated loudly throughout the house. She always greeted him and woke him up in the mornings, sometimes more or less dressed than she is now, but her lack of clothing never fazed him because she was his mother and it wasn't like she was hiding anything that he was unaware of. Sometimes she carried a knife or a gun, but nothing biologically surprising. Naruto moaned again, his lazy and irritated gaze aimed at Anko with the intent to kill, or at the very least, to disappear. His complaint was, "Sleep, more sleep. You've gotten your 8 hours, you're fine," she said, grinning and swiftly removing the cover from him. She laughed as he huddled up to keep warm, moaned even more, and objected to getting out of bed. She would always find a way to have the last laugh, even if it meant killing her. If he were to pull a practical joke on her, she would return it tenfold. If he did anything, she would get back at him, but it didn't always happen immediately. Sometimes months would go by before she returned any favors, but she always got him back. Frequently, she would trick him into believing she forgot. Naruto got up slowly, realizing that fighting her would be pointless because she was not only smarter and more sly than he was, but she had also taught him from the ground up and knew all of his abilities as well as at least a dozen ways to counter them. Naruto carried the symbol of the Hidden Leaf, the criminal organization his mother worked with for many years before retiring to America. They were like family to him, and it was a shame that he had to leave them all behind. Just as he didn't mind seeing his mother in nothing but underwear, he also didn't feel ashamed or embarrassed when he was around her wearing only trunks. He had some clothes in one of the bags he had brought up with him, including a pair of black pants and an orange and black track jacket, along with his favorite headband. "So there's a little cafe a few blocks away. You won't be starting school for another week or so you can get used to the new city," Anko said while leaning against the door frame. "Lucky Cat Cafe, it's called. The head of the institute told me that one of your classmates lives there." "I've been meaning to ask you about that," Naruto said, pulling his orange and black jacket over a plain black t-shirt. "The paper, the brochure, it says that admittance is gained through some sort of exposition," he said. "Don't worry, I convinced the dean to let you in, given your skill set and talent, not to mention your records back in Japan," said Anko, shaking her head as she moved closer to tousle her son's hair. "But it seems unfair," Naruto shrugged, sighing. He wasn't one to talk about being unfair, but he knew his passion and that other people had passions too. If he were in their position, he would be furious that a nameless child from another country simply waltzed in instead of showcasing their talents like the others. "And what will the others of the school say when they find out that I was just admitted?" he asked. Anko took her phone out of her trench coat and tapped the screen, saying, "If you feel so strongly, I'll talk to him." "You can't go back to the easy route now, Sochi." Ha already had ideas about what he could make to get into the school. He could have just put one of his previous projects on display, but he wanted something different, a challenge for himself, something so amazing and spectacular that it would blow everyone in the vicinity away. "You have 20, Anko's voice drew Naruto back to reality. Naruto was all too familiar with those words and waited for his mother to leave the room before he ran out with his hygiene bag and located the closest restroom. When it came to certain things, Anko held Naruto to her own standards. She always took 20 minutes or less to get ready for the day, and she expected Naruto to do the same. If she could get all of her clothes on, makeup, hair, and washing done in 20 minutes, Naruto should be able to do it in 5. After preparing for the day, the two of them reconnected on the bottom floor, where the boxes were still strewn around. Naruto was waiting for his mother at the bottom of the stairs. His hair was freshly dried and as spiky as normal. He didn't require any special gels or lotions to keep it up, it was always up. Like Naruto, he was given the mysterious ability to control the wind, and he was not surprised to see his mother land next to him from the top of the stairwell. She landed without any injuries, making a soft whoosh sound as she touched down. She loved jumping and climbing things, which was one of the many things he took on after her. She had always been a fan of hardcore parkour. She questioned him, "Ready to go?" "Yes," Naruto nodded in return, his blonde and purple hair trembling as he moved his head. After exiting the building, the two went down to the hill where they lived. For the first time in many years, Naruto and his mother left their new house a month ago. They spent the morning at the Lucky Cat Cafe, where they met Kaz Hamada, the cafe's owner. She seemed to manage it well enough on her own, but she did lament that her two brilliant nephews lacked the intelligence necessary to get her some kind of robotic assistance. Naruto had not yet met any of the Hamada children. Tadashi had been spending extra hours at the institute on a new project, and Hiro had recently received his high school diploma. Hiro Hamada completed high school at the age of 13, and not even Naruto could laugh at that fact. However, there wasn't time to consider Naruto's brother and future classmate. It was time to present his latest creation to the world. Standing on the circular platform in the spacious showroom, Naruto gazed at the spectators while a single light shone on him. He would be lying if he claimed he wasn't nervous about getting in because all of the other applicants were as intelligent as he was in their respective fields. Some may have even been vying for his place in the same engineering and thermodynamics program, and his English wasn't very good either. His accent still interfered with many English words and sounds. To get attention, Naruto said, "Hello," into the microphone. "Hello?" he repeated, making sure that most, if not all, of the eyes in the room were on him. "Yo." As he paced across the platform, his hands moved in tandem with his voice as he talked. He paused his pacing to address his topic, making knife hands and slicing downward, saying, "Technology advances more and more every day, but the world, especially here in America, is troubled by one problem: fossil fuels." He started pacing again and said, "The transition to electricity is slow here, but I have two new creations that will solve the problem," before stopping once more and standing at the end of the platform with his arms outstretched. He said, "Mamushi," in a whisper just before he sprang from the stage and into the crowd. The spectators screamed and screamed in terror, but they were only able to hear a faint humming sound. Nearly silently, Naruto hovered over them. When they looked up, they saw the young guy with the mechanical wings extended as far as they could. "My first invention for you to see is my winged jetpack," he said, slowly hovering backwards and steadily rising as he approached the stage. "The wings retract and expand, based on the muscles used in your arms and back, and is propelled by two special jets," Naruto said, spinning and moving all over as he explained, "as fast as a real jet plane, and as small as a toy one," he said. He landed silently on the ground after tapering off and saying, "Das Heel." His fingers shot up in the air, forcing him to stand up again. "The jets are powered using my new fuel. It is unnamed but is as safe as electricity with the power of tank fuel," he said. Seeing the positive feedback his inventions were receiving, he grinned at himself and said, "I was falling asleep when I thought of the formula, and spent the next few days working on it. The fuel is of my own making. I don't want to bore you all with it, it would just sound like I poured fuels into a jar and shook it," he said. He impressed the board with his exhibition, and the description of his ideas continued without incident, but it ended far too quickly. For the last time that night, Naruto hovered back down. After his performance, he removed his backpack and put it in the case he had brought. As he was doing so, he saw a head of black and purple hair fading into the crowd. He thought it might have been his mother's hair, but the person leaving didn't have Anko's trench coat. He shook his head, wondering if anyone else enjoyed purple hair. Two individuals approached Naruto. His mother, who was standing next to an elderly guy wearing a sweater vest, was the first to approach. Anko put her son in a headlock to ruffle his hair and exclaimed, "Great Gaki. It went great. I knew you could do it." Naruto chuckled and tried to get away, but he had to wait till she let him go. Even though he remained silent, Naruto could tell that the man in the sweater vest was eager to talk because of his serene and kind smile when he saw the mother and son pair. His whole manner was kind. "I have to admit, Naruto-san, I did have my doubts about you when I was informed about you being invited into our school without having to show at the expo." He approached the two with a bow. "Robert Callahan, you'll be attending my robotics class." Having doubts about the middle-aged man, Naruto's mother pushed him ahead while whispering in his ear. "He isn't in with the program," Anko said in their own tongue to avoid Callahan's ears. Naruto's hearing was as good as it could be, despite the fact that he was usually listening to an engine. "Just that we're foreign, be polite," Anko said. Callahan didn't appear to care, whether the mind comes from next door or overseas. "I welcome new people in my class, I can't wait to see what other projects you devise with me and your classmates." Naruto's hand rose first, then Callahan's, and they shook hands. Naruto thought it was only right that he showed the older man the same courtesy because, after all, he was his new teacher and it wouldn't be good to get on his bad side. He didn't appear to be able to have a bad side, but Naruto was all too familiar with the saying. When a good man goes to war, demons flee. He grinned and laughed to himself, moving his weight from side to side. "Class begins next school year, and I'm sure you'll get along with your classmates swimmingly," he said. "I'd say prepare and study up, but I think you'll be just fine," he said. Naruto wanted the night to be a racing night, but he couldn't race without a car or other vehicle. He also knew that using his new wing pack would not even be counted, so he celebrated his arrival with his mother instead. The two sang jovially and cheerfully as they made their way from the exposition hall to the Lucky Cat Cafe, where Cass Hamada worked. Naruto opened the door so that Anko could enter first. She was so delighted of her son's acceptance into the institute that she waltzed into the cafe as though she owned it. "Oh, hey, it's you two." Cass grinned as soon as they walked into the cafe. "How'd the expo go?" she said, leaning closer to the counter to get a better look at the mother and son pair. Anko pulled her kid into another headlock while singing out loud, "Guess who just got into the San Francisco Institute of Technology?" She pointed her thumb at the boy with her free hand to show that she was referring to him. Cass grinned and hopped in her place. Over the course of the month, Anko spent a lot of her mornings at the cafe, chatting with Cass and getting food for Naruto and herself. Occasionally, she would stay later than expected to hear about Hiro and Tadashi's academic achievements. Anko learned that Tadashi would be starting his second year at the institute, which meant Naruto would have someone familiar with the campus to help him if he ever needed it. Cass looked to the stairs that led to the building's living quarters and exclaimed, "Tadashi! Hiro! Come over here and meet our new neighbors." A young man peered into the kitchen from the paneless window to see who Cass was referring to. His brown eyes and black hair were unremarkable to Naruto and Anko, who had blue and amber eyes and purple hair, respectively, but they did find amusement in the kiss on the cook's apron. He inspected Naruto and smiled briefly before leaving through the door and pulling back into the kitchen. "So you're Naruto, huh?" he asked, looking up and down at the young man. "I'm sorry we didn't talk much before the expo. I've been working on something new, and I'm sure you blew the board away with whatever you made," he said, putting down his hand before Naruto could shake it. Tadashi appeared to have realized they weren't from America, so he bowed. "Hamada Tadashi, nice to finally meet the both of you," he said. "Hiro. Get your lazy butt down here, we've got guests," he said, turning to face the stairs as Cass did, bending forward and even taking a few steps in that direction. As they waited for the youngest to enter the public, Naruto and his mother followed the Hamada custom of gazing up at the steps. Unexpectedly, a hooded figure began to tumble after hearing a yelp from the stairs. Naruto felt the want to jump and save the falling person, but the hand on his shoulder prevented him from doing so. A hand reached out to massage his forehead in an attempt to ease the pain as the figure moaned. "Nice entrance, goofball, how's your head?" Tadashi said, laughing and assisting the short figure to stand up. He then removed the hood to show a tangle of jet black hair and weary eyes. "Hiro Hamada, nice to meet you too," he said abruptly, not bothering to glance at Naruto and Anko. "I'll be fine, just been working a lot," he said, continuing to rub his head without appearing to notice either of the two figures. She jumped and clapped her hands ecstatically, bouncing within a small invisible circle to avoid hitting anyone. "He's just tired, he's been working day and night on something new, a robot. Can you believe it?" Cass said, laughing nervously and moving to Hiro's free side, comforting him with a shoulder pat. Even though she was a little more embarrassing than most guardians, Cass tried a little too hard to be cool and supportive to her nephews. She was the cool mom, the fun uncle, and the crazy aunt all rolled into one brunette being. Hiro's apprehensive laugh and Tadashi's more genuine one demonstrated that they cared for her in return for her efforts. "A robot?" asked Naruto. "Can it think on its own? Or is it controlled by the remote?" Hiro responded monotonously, "Remote, AI is tricky, and the bot is too small to fit what I need to make it an AI," and he started to go to one side before the other, waiting slowly back and forth while his eyelids drooped lower and lower. Anko regarded the youngest member of the group with suspicion, questioning whether Cass ought to have brought him an energy drink or a mug of coffee. "We need celebration food. For the newest student of the San Francisco Institute," Cass said as she dashed into the kitchen. While Hiro climbed the stairs, Naruto and his mother laughed together and Tadashi led them to a table. The three heads that were accessible turned to check what had happened to Hiro after hearing another loud thud and groan of pain coming from the stairs. Since none of them saw him at the foot of the stairs, Tadashi assumed the worst and that he had fallen close to his room. Tadashi excused himself to assist his brother, saying, "I'll be right back." Naruto and Anko sat down at the table opposite each other and waited patiently for Cass to bring them their food. They both wondered what she was preparing for them, Naruto didn't think she made noodles frequently because she owned a cafe, but it seemed more likely that she would make dango and other treats. He questioned whether the dango she might be preparing was of any quality. It had to be at least passable to keep the cafe open, but Naruto was certain that it was inferior to his own recipe. When they refused to give them the recipe list, Naruto had previously taken the initiative to close a dango and restaurant. The establishment also functioned as a black market business before moving to a nearby ramen shack. Anko was upset that he had closed the establishment, but he always made up for it by making her dango using the recipe. Cass came back with a tray of food and beverages for the two of them. Anko had a small black coffee mug on a similarly small plate, with little containers of creams and sugars surrounding the mug in case Anko wanted to switch it up. Naruto enjoyed a soda, which wasn't nearly as interesting as her mother's coffee, but it didn't really matter to him. Anko ate more humanely, pausing sometimes to speak with Cass, who was seated backwards on one of the chairs, while Naruto devoured the meal, without caring what it was as long as it was edible and pleasing to his taste receptors. So, I take it that Naruto's wing thing went well? Anko had previously told Cass about Naruto's construction, and Anko figured it was safe to assume that Tadashi and perhaps Hiro were also aware of it through her. Yes, Anko said, nodding as she put her hand over the coffee mug. The board loved it, it even blew Professor Callahan away, she said with a sigh of relief after taking a gulp. He is a tough cookie to actually impress, Cass said, nodding her head in agreement with Anko and her own unsaid sentiments. He's seen a lot of cool science stuff in his day, I know that much. Even Tadashi had a bit of trouble impressing him the first time he tried out for the show, she added. She didn't have the same intelligence as her nephews, but her heart was in the right place. After last year's Expo disaster, Cass made the morally right decision to let Tadashi and Hiro perform in peace. However, she wasn't good with machines like the two of them. After making sure Hiro was okay, Tadashi joined them later and went to bed. They ate and spoke all night long. When the Lucky Cat Cafe's closing time finally arrived, Naruto and Anko left for the evening. Naruto made the decision to hold off on giving Cass his dango recipe. Excellent black market cuisine is not inexpensive. School will begin in just over 2 months, and Anko wanted to make sure that her son had at least one person he knew on the first day. A week after the expo ended, she had made it a point to introduce Naruto to Tadashi and the Hamada family. Yama, one of her old friends from her mission days, had a similar idea of starting over in America away from the Hidden Leaf. He fled years earlier and was able to get started earlier than Anko, but that never seemed to be a disadvantage for either of them. Even through thick and thin, nothing helped a deal among friends like a little extra money. Anko had also been meeting with her American contacts, re-establishing her web of information to ensure that life for her and her son would continue to run smoothly in the city. The sun was beaming in Naruto's room like it often did on this sunny morning in San Francisco, but this time it wasn't the sun that woke him up. When Naruto put his feet down on the ground, he could feel a little rumbling coming from beneath him. The floor shook just enough to make an impression, but not enough to dislodge anything. Without having to guess, he hurried out of his room and down the stairwell with a powerful leap, pushing the air down just before he touched the ground. Wearing only his boxers and a light shirt, he ran outside while observing his mother lying down on a bike. It wasn't just any bike either. Naruto's mouth fell to the floor, he was completely taken aback by what he saw. Anko grinned at her son's "piss your pants in excitement" expression as she swung around on the bike's long seat, seating down normally while accelerating it for her son's enjoyment. It was Naruto's own motorcycle from back in Japan, and it had 4 independent wheels for maximum mobility and maneuverability. The Yamaha chassis and shell were heavily modified, and the arm struts were completely redone to support the 4 independent wheels. The handles were made to resemble racing bicycle handles, which were vertical and lower on the body. Each handle moved, rotated, and swiveled to control the wheels and speed. As though Anko had been waiting for the ideal opportunity to show off the bike and herself, the sleek and angular body of the bike reflected sage green rays from the early morning sun. "Hunter," Naruto muttered to himself incredulously as he approached the bike gently, as if it were his true love, and touched the green metal. He grinned at his mother and jumped on the bike as she got off. The strands of what appeared to be rope on the end twirled and whirled around before settling back down with the pull of gravity, and he grinned at his mother as he easily caught the helmet she had thrown at him. Anko dismissively waved her hand and said, "Don't leave too late. If I see you at the station, I'm shipping that thing back to Japan, no matter the risk." With a grumble, Naruto put on the sleek helmet and turned on the side light. His helmet looked a lot like the Predator helmet from the films, but it was smoother, sleeker, and made to be a real safety helmet. As Naruto roared to life, his mother laughed behind him, even toppling over with laughter. Naruto would quickly come to understand. Without a care in the world, Naruto sped through the city, turning on every light and regaining his rhythm with his unique cycle. The city was bustling even at this early hour, with many people's days just beginning and others nearing their finish. Not everyone followed the same 9-to-5 routine. The one thing Naruto did not expect, though, was climbing one of the ramps to the highway, where it appeared that a race was being held. Fortunately for him, the other racers were all riding motorcycles, so they couldn't accuse him of utilizing a different vehicle to win. He quickly dispatched all but one of the riders as he swerved between the cars, trucks, and other vehicles. Even though the single racer rode a 2-wheeled bike, Naruto appeared to be on par with this individual, who consistently maintained an advantage over him by skillfully and effortlessly swerving between the cars. They were always right in front of Naruto, making it impossible for him to pass. Under his helmet, Naruto grunted. He pressed 2 buttons on the bike's handles, one on each, and the bike leaped into the air and landed on top of a big semi-truck. From there, he raced on top of the trailer and into a tiny clearing that was just big enough for him to accelerate without requiring much maneuvering. Naruto quickly caught up to the other racer and moved to their left. The other rider tried to push him off the highway, but Naruto's prey mask on top of a toned, slender body wearing only a pair of boxers and a basic t-shirt distracted him enough that they almost collided with a car they were catching up to. The rider growled and shook their head, threatening to tear the helmet off and toss it to the ground as they swerved and screeched over the asphalt, using the closest off-ramp to exit the highway and gather himself. Soon after, the other racers circled around the first at the bottom of the ramp, looking hopefully at the first rider to see what the strategy was for the new, unexpected racer. The rider sighed as they removed their helmet and placed it directly in front of them, exposing a black head of hair with purple strands. The female figure prepared another stick to chew on by reaching up to her mouth and removing a bit of wadded gum, then flicking it to the ground. She grunted as she glared at the highway, recalling the sleek black Predator mask with the 2 designs of burnt orange fangs etched in her head. Pulling up the throttle to refocus attention on the bikers, she put her helmet back on to hide whatever her face could have been doing at the moment. "Looks like the Predator changed up their hunting grounds, boys, let's catch us a racer," she said. "For 40 minutes, Anko tallied. After realizing that he had only worn boxers and a tight muscle shirt when he left the house, Naruto returned precisely 40 minutes and 22 seconds later. She had just recovered from her outburst of laughter after 10 minutes, but she burst into tears again as soon as she saw her son drive home at 60 miles per hour, stop the bike on a dime, and fly inside to change into something more suitable. Upon his return to the living room that had been commandeered, Naruto gave his mother a menacing look, to which she responded with a sly smile. "Have a fun ride, Sochi." "Breezy enough for you?" she inquired, keeping her gaze fixed on her copy of Bible Black's first book. It was nothing new between them. Insults and badmouthing were never reprimanded when used against one another, rather, it was a contest to see who could sling the best, crudest, or most profound insults. He raised his middle finger without responding, but she only gave him a quick glance, so she had plenty of time to laugh at his response. "Lucky Cat Run, would you like anything?" Naruto pulled down the book to make his mother look at him. He was wearing a leather racing jacket and black jeans, and the jacket's orange collar was unbuttoned. The entire jacket unzipped to show his mesh undershirt. The jacket was black on the shoulders, arms, and upper part of the pecs, with a white horizontal stripe below that separated the black top from the orange bottom. The elbows of the jacket also had the same orange tone, and the white also separated the two colors there. It was a black half helmet with a thick orange stripe in the middle and two white strips separating the two colors. A jagged S shape was located in the center of the orange near the bottom of the front of the helmet, and it had a gray visor that provided just enough protection from the sun without obscuring Naruto's eyes. Naruto's casual riding helmet was in his grasp just moments after he caught his mother's attention. "Nothing for me, kiddo, leave a nice tip for them, though." "Hi," Naruto said, nodding and putting the helmet on his head as he walked out the open door. He noticed a few more bikers outside, but it didn't really surprise him because he had been riding too fast to notice any of them. Perhaps they had been riding around all along and he had just never noticed them before because their faces were obscured by masks and reflective visors that were similar to the visor of his predator mask. They were barely there for a moment before they left, going the other way from where he was going. The front and rear dual wheels of Naruto's bike folded up to function as a more conventional cycle as he rode at a leisurely and peaceful pace to the Lucky Cat Cafe. He stopped directly in front of the cafe's door, removed his helmet, and walked slowly inside. Tadashi said, "Hey, Naruto," in a slightly labored and breathy voice. "Any fun plans for the day?" "I wish I could join you, but I had to rush back from the institute to get on shift here at the cafe," he said, speaking at 100 miles per hour and speaking in a single breath despite all of the brief pauses. Naruto said, "Well, thank you," but he was confused of how to reply beyond bowing politely and saying, "But nothing is planned for today." The room was silent, and Tadashi and Naruto could only hear the faint noises of life outside, people talking and walking, passing cars, motorcycles purring as they circled the cafe, and the occasional dog, cat, or bird singing its songs for everyone to hear. Pardoning himself, Naruto said, "Anyway, I am just here for something to snack on, I haven't eaten yet today," leaning slightly against the main counter. "A chocolate muffin, if I may?" he asked. Tadashi put the muffin on the counter and slid over to the register after reaching into the glass cabinet to retrieve the desired food and using his free hand to push the appropriate buttons into the cash register. "150 will be your total today," he said. Naruto remained quiet and gazed at his feet, his breaths nearly formed words, but Tadashi could not make out what he was saying. He grabbed for his wallet slowly, unfolding the leather piece and pushing the money from side to side while counting them. Though it didn't seem like nearly as much as Zen, he wasn't going to complain. It felt a little more humble to him to purchase the same items of the same quality with an exchange rate that used significantly fewer zeros. He gave Tadashi just $2, the right amount without the need for coins. Naruto was informed by the sound of money ringing in his ear that Tadashi was giving him back his change. He pocketed the 2 silver pieces and took the muffin, biting down on it before sitting down close to the counter. As he ate his breakfast, he looked out the window and took in the scenery. Tadashi appeared concerned about Naruto. He leaned closer and glanced at the younger guy, wondering what was going through his head. "Something bothering you, or still not used to the city?" The muffin was placed on the table, nearly forgotten, and Naruto shook his head while continuing to gaze out the window. "No, it isn't that," he said. "Just thinking, Japan was a little dangerous. My mother always made sure that I was aware of everything, so it's just a habit I will have to break," they said, pausing for a moment. Neither of them really wanted to end. Tadashi shrugged and walked around the counter, patting Naruto's shoulder firmly. Since Yama's gang lived in their neighborhood and there were other gangs and illegal rings all over the city, it wasn't a bad habit to have. "It's a good thing to have, Naruto. Some people just move in and expect the movie city life, usually having to move out because they weren't ready for the real thing," Tadashi said. Naruto abruptly got up from his seat, put his helmet back on, and left without saying anything more to his friend. "I'm going to head out, stay safe, Tadashi, you can always call if you need help," he said. "But," he said, tapering off as the door closed behind his friend, the door's bell chiming as it struck the hammer on the door frame. Tadashi was far less concerned about Naruto's odd behavior than the average person should be. He looked down at the table in despair, his eyes slightly watering. The muffin. On his way to his motorcycle, Naruto walked swiftly and lightly, leaving little time for anything other than mounting the bike and riding around the block where the cafe was located. As far as Naruto knew, there were no signs of other riders on the street, and he combed the area. Before heading back to his house, he had circled the block at least 15 times. The bikes appeared to have vanished from the scene. Assuming that whatever he was watching was after the Hamada family and not him, he thought about stopping somewhere to make sure they would be safe all day. If they were after him and not the family, staying put could put them in greater risk. There were advantages and disadvantages to fighting alongside his mother, but he chose to stay away for the time being to ride out his sense of danger. She didn't need him to eliminate a few waves of assassins or hitmen, it would have been a little easier with him by her side. Naruto rode away from home after making his rounds. If someone decided to attack their house, he could definitely handle it herself, if they managed to get past the hidden defenses, that is. Naruto rode through the city at full speed, swerving and twisting wherever he could. A child was standing in the middle of the narrower road, staring at the bike that had stopped a few feet from him after he turned sharply on a corner and stopped so abruptly that he nearly fell out of his saddle. Naruto's breath caught. He almost killed a child, and if he hadn't been so skilled, he may have done it by accident. The boy heard a voice calling out to him from the side of the road, "Hey, little guy. It isn't safe playing in the street. Come on back over here." The tall, lanky voice owner hurried over to the boy and gathered him in his arms as the boy laughed and giggled. The man who was holding him turned to face Naruto, and the two of them had blue eyes that seemed to match. Naruto's blonde hair also appeared to be the same color as the man's, who was perhaps a few years older than him, if he had to guess. The surfer accent he used to say, "Sorry about that, man, the kids can be a little bit of a handful," was a stereotype of Californians created by Japan. According to Naruto, America appeared to have embraced the caricature before other nations did. The South was all yee-haw, the North all New York, and everything in the West, particularly California, had that surfer accent. Naruto grinned and shook his head, saying, "It is nothing, I should have been more careful," as he observed the man's look change from relaxed to enthusiastic. He ran over to look at Naruto's bike, and his blue beanie nearly flew off. "Dude," he said, "I know this bike. You must be a big fan of the Predator too, right man?" "Predator?" asked Naruto, who was interested by the man's knowledge of the name, even if he was aware of it. He stopped and put the child down, allowing him to run back to the sidewalk to one of the food tables. "Yeah, the Predator, fastest racer in all of Japan, and a vigilante who brings the lowly scum of Tokyo to justice. He's like a real-life superhero," he said. "I'm F. Franco," and reached out to shake Naruto's hand. The two briefly shook hands before putting their arms back together. In addition to being the name of a television series, the Predator was also the code name for a racer in Japan who wore a helmet similar to the Predator's. Although he wasn't a superhero, the Predator was a racer who frequently stopped robberies and chase scenes when he happened to be in the area. Naruto laughed. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said, "I guess you could say I'm a fan. Before I moved here, I made this recreation of the Predator's motorcycle. It was difficult, but I think you would be proud." He grinned at himself for a number of reasons. He was shocked that the name had spread so far outside of Japan. There had been a rumor that the Predator had stopped so many car chases in his time that the chief of police wanted to award him for his bravery and outstanding achievement, but it never happened because he was still an illegal underground racer, and being kind to police wasn't something that illegal underground racer vigilantes did frequently. After removing the helmet from his head and unsnapping it, Naruto leaned sideways and carefully examined the jet black hair patch. "Your mustache, did you dye your mustache a different color than your hair?" he said. Franco shook his head and turned away, saying, "Don't think about it, man, I've got that heterochrome stuff in my hair," quickly turning his head to the side and avoiding eye contact with Naruto. "No way, man, it's just, always like that, black mustache and blondish hair," he said. Naruto laughed, unsure of how to respond to the odd and quirky man, but he was unable to say anything before one of the kids yelled out to Franco. "Mr. Frank. Megan keeps saying that this clothes box is too big for me, but it's got the same number that I do. I'll talk to you later, Naruto, have a good one," Franco said, laughing and turning to face the children. Franco left to speak with the two kids, informing the girl that she shouldn't have been keeping the boy from the clothes box. The girl appeared to apologize to them both, but Naruto fled before more information about the incident could be made public. He was conscious that he was an odd man, but Naruto understood that there were probably more odd people in the city. He spent the remainder of the day getting lost in the city, exploring every street to see where it led and what was nearby. He discovered a lot of small stores along the way, including a sushi restaurant, a small flower shop, a few more cafes, hobby stores, parts stores, and other locations. Because of the Institute of Technology's prominence in the city, San Francisco was a hotbed of what the West called geek culture. More intellectual establishments, such as hobby shops, workshops, and locations for different parts for different creations, robots, and houses, made it possible for anything to be created with the right parts from the right places. Contrary to popular belief, the city was a fine blend of Eastern and Western culture, with Eastern variations of Western things and vice versa. The day ended too soon, and Naruto arrived home as the sun was shining on the bay and the city's lights had gone out. This time around, perhaps, the lovely sound of another one of his handmade machines wouldn't wake him up. He was an old and perverted bastard, to be sure, but he knew everything there was to know about anything illegal, even outside of Japan. Naruto woke up to a number of notifications on his computer in the morning, including many about the underground racing circuits that he had one of his mother's contacts look into for him. "Let's see what that perverted sage has for me today," he said to himself in his native tongue for the first time since coming to America, without his mother's consent. He rarely spoke in Japanese aloud anymore, primarily due to his fear of her punishment for breaking her rules, but it also helped him learn the language better. Jiraiya, the self-described sage of toads, perversities, and purveyor of beauty, had done a little more for him than just provide him with information about racetracks. He had also provided him with information about Yama, an old friend of his mother's who was a gang leader and had his own underground robot fighting league. Naruto wasn't particularly interested in robots, he preferred his vehicles, but he could see how power armor and robots could help in battle. It seems that the odd, lanky man wearing the beanie he had previously seen wasn't the only person who knew about Predator. Slipstream, a racer, had been openly criticizing anyone they thought was a Predator imposter and encouraging them to compete so that others could determine who was superior. Naruto laughed at the dare. He wasn't a vigilante who fights crime, he was just a racer who knew what to do when he was in danger and how to alert the authorities. However, who was he to deny the excitement of a challenge to someone who had been acclaimed as Japan's fastest racer? Informing Jiraiya that he intended to let the alleged Slipstream know that the race was taking place in precisely 1 week and where they would be meeting, he touched the buttons on his computer. After deciding on everything, he sent the message and awaited a response. Since Naruto had done his math correctly, the old pervert should still be awake by now, and it would be around 1 in the morning back in Japan. The response was nearly immediate. He received a second notice on his computer informing him of a message from Jiraiya. He confirmed that he had sent Slipstream, whomever they were, information on the impending race and assured Naruto that he would keep him informed of any further developments. Soon after, Anko knocked on his already opened door to announce her presence, causing her son to jump in shock at her abrupt and unannounced arrival in his room. "Morning, Sochi," was her standard greeting to Naruto. She grinned broadly and moved deeper into his room, whether or not he requested it. Under the guise of Predator, she glanced over his shoulder and checked the computer screen, reading the invitation from the racer Slipstream and the racing details Jiraiya had provided them both. She grinned at his trembling head while knowing that she was saying the wrong things. "So, that old fart is still giving out race information? Sochi, you gotta go out and pick these races on your own sometime," she said. Although Naruto didn't always like acknowledging that he depended on his perverted godfather for racing information and maintaining the Predator identity, he wouldn't have been the man he was without Jiraiya's assistance. "But mother," he replied to her, "this Predator persona is mysterious and shows up unannounced to races. Old man Jiraiya has always helped me with the races and stuff. They might have been out of Japan now, but there was always the chance that someone would try to attack them, and neither of them was planning on letting the other go without someone they could completely trust keeping an eye on them." Anko just rolled her eyes at her son, letting him do as he pleased. He was 18, he was his own man, and even though he lived with her, neither of them had any issues with the situation. As the days went by and it drew nearer, Naruto kept adjusting his bike here and there to guarantee victory. When the race day finally arrived, the competitors assembled in front of the San Francisco Institute of Technology. Jiraiya had apparently disseminated the information about the race to other racing circles so that they could watch it. Although there were only 2 competitors, the crowd size practically shouted that this might as well have been an official race, at least in terms of viewership. To further hide his identity, Naruto rolled up to the race wearing a separate blue and black racing suit and his predator helmet. The starting line, which coincidentally was the school's parking lot exit, was where his opponent was already waiting for him. Since there was only one entry and one exit, there was only one option to combine with traffic and minimize accidents. As he made his way through the entrance, Naruto glanced around at the racers and racing fans who were encouraging him and wishing him well in his new nation. He nearly didn't halt at the exit, but a bike crossed his path to catch his eye and make him turn to face the rider. Like Naruto, they rode a custom bike, but this one was longer and much sleeker than the others. It appeared that both wheels were not attached to the bike itself, and it moved and stayed upright using a system of magnets. To ride the bike, the rider had to shape their body into the seat, with their body resting nearly entirely across the bike. But the cyclist sat up. But unlike Naruto, Slipstream was clearly a woman, and the racing suit accentuated her contours and shapes, even in the dim light of the neighboring street lamps. Slipstream, like him, had a full-body suit and totally covered their face with a helmet. The dark visor covering her face changed to a clear one as Slipstream's hand reached up to the side of her helmet and pressed a button. She was not at all pleased, and her scowling face pierced Naruto's helmet and looked directly into his eyes. "I'm the queen of racing in this city, and I'm going to prove it to everyone that I'm faster than the legendary Predator. There's only room for one legend in this city, and she's been living here since birth." It wasn't that he wasn't intimidated, certainly not. She did instill some terror in him, but Naruto had to suppress a laugh at her outrage at his outwitting of her approximately a week prior. Through the use of a voice modulation device, Naruto's voice changed in tone and sound. "So," he said, "where to?" "The highway I raced you on." "Lucky Cat Cafe?" "The docks." The device inside his helmet changed, altered, and shifted his voice continuously, making it nearly impossible for anyone recording it to decipher. "The docks," she said without humor, and before Naruto could notice the odd expression on her face, Slipstream tapped the button on the side of her helmet once more, this time with the visor completely dark. Slipstream gestured forward while backing into the starting position. A young woman stood between the two racers with flags flying high. Above the roaring engines, she yelled, "Ready!" They screamed like untamed lions, frightening their prey. "Say dash," Predator interrupted her, sitting up on his bike and turning to face Slipstream, who let out a sigh that Naruto could hear. When there is nothing at stake, racing for fun is uninteresting. "Wait up," Naruto said, holding up a hand to the female standing. "What's the prize?" "If I win, you unmask and announce that I am a better racer," she said, deliberating about a good prize for a while before responding. "And if I win, you tell everyone that not even you can best the Predator, and will connect me to the best races in the city," Naruto said, nodding in agreement with her reward. If she was to be honest, she was actually rather honored to be racing against the best in Japan, but he did it in such a calm, jovial way that stomped on all of her hard work. He lived in Japan, not America, and probably had no idea where any of the racing circles, leagues, or circuits were in town. She seemed to think the prize was fair enough. "We can start now," he said, leaning back in his chair and nodding to the girl. "Ready? Set, go," she said, raising her flags once more as she laughed at his beaming demeanor. With their motors roaring, the racers took off, and the cheering of the audience behind them grew progressively quieter as they moved farther away. Although it surprised him that Slipstream could keep up with Naruto and his bike, he wasn't particularly frightened about winning the race because her magnetic wheels eliminated friction between the bike and the wheels, but he was still concerned about braking and stopping. Putting aside his thoughts, Naruto rode alongside Slipstream and tried his best to appear as though he was struggling against the other racer. With the fuel he had chosen to test just before the race, he could easily reach new speed records. His bike begged him to accelerate harder, but it had not yet reached its top speed with the new fuel. Even though she was aware that she was faster than him, she was unable to shake him. Slipstream tried to break free from her opponent by squeezing through the crevices as they rode up the ramp onto a highway that was all too familiar. Even as chase music played through his helmet, Naruto was certain he could hear her moan of frustration. He was unable to mirror her, so instead he leaped onto the opposite side of the highway and continued to race her while dodging oncoming traffic. He laughed to himself and sped up, jumping back over once he had the upper hand. Knowing that his wider and heavier bike would undoubtedly take a better hit than her smaller and lighter one, he backed away as he tried to push her onto the exit. He didn't anticipate that she would throw herself and her bike at him to get him to back off. If they did collide, he was concerned that her bike's magnets would lose their wheels, sending her spinning around in traffic. Along streets, hills, left and right, Naruto kept pace with Slipstream at every turn. Regardless of how she moved, he would always manage to move better, faster, and more efficiently than she could. Stores went by quickly, including the Lucky Cat Cafe, that tiny sushi joint, and the flower shop that Naruto had noticed while strolling around the city. The two soon found themselves in the industrial area close to the sea, where Slipstream became aggressive and did everything in her power to win the race. It was only at this point that Naruto made the decision to test the limits of the new fuel, easily slicing past Slipstream as he arrived at the end of the docks and skidding to a stop as he got close to the water. It took 20 seconds for Slipstream to rush up to her opponent in a furious manner, and Naruto could see her frown even through her helmet. She flipped up her visor as she stopped and jumped off her bike when it had slowed down sufficiently. The predator's mask stared into her eyes, leaving her uncertain as to whether he was grinning beneath it or was utterly indifferent to the circumstance. His voice was repetitive and flat, and his helmet's visor resembled a pitch-black abyss. "I win," he said. It was almost callous as Slipstream gazed into that pitch-black abyss and saw her own reflection in the faint light. There was no sense of eyes watching her back, just her own brown eyes. Before she could say anything more, Naruto sped out of the harbor. After being battered on the highway, Slipstream felt the urge to slam her helmet to the ground. She hardly saw the small index card he had left there as she watched him ride off, glaring at him like daggers. She approached it, knelt down, and listened as the only sound to break the sound of the breaking waves was the squeaking of the leather. It was on its back, with the Predator's helmet in a simplified logo painted in black ink. Her fingers turned the card over so she could examine the other side. Or did I? We're the only ones who know who won, I'll be in contact. The card's backside featured neat, elegant script that resembled calligraphy. The punctuation and underlining were both thick and dark in contrast to the letter's delicate strokes. Additionally, he had that card ready, he knew he was going to win, and the fact that he seemed to always keep up with her made so much more sense now. She moaned once more. He was so arrogant in that monotonous tone of his, dumbly dark and mysterious, and he was letting her take the win out of sympathy and for her own reputation. She moaned to herself as she put her helmet back on and cycled back into the city after shattering the card in her fist and pocketing it. She owed him one, whatever he was.